a boy who mucked stalls for pennies, and a forgotten key buried behind a church. When the stallion began to dig, no one believed it meant anything, until the ground gave way to a rusted box, a letter from 1897, and a truth hidden for generations. What they uncovered wasn't just a secret, it was a calling, a map, a memory only the stallion had kept alive. This isn't just a story about a horse, it's a story about what happens when the past refuses to be forgotten. Nobody bothered with the old stallion. He'd been tied up behind the feed store for almost a week, swatting flies with his tail and chewing air from a bitless bridle, ribs showing clean through his hide. Most folks in town assumed he'd wandered off from some drifter's pack line and got left behind. A few of the kids threw pebbles at him. One old man gave him a handful of cornmeal. Nobody asked who he belonged to. Nobody cared. He was too old, too slow. His back had a sway like a half-sunk porch, and one of his eyes was filmed over with the ghost glaze of blindness. His coat was a patchwork of scars and missing hair, like someone had given up grooming him years ago. His hooves were cracked. One of them bled when he shifted his weight. No one expected him to last through the week. And then he started digging. It happened behind the church. No one saw him arrive there, only that one morning he was gone from the feed store hitch, and by afternoon someone noticed hoof prints in the dry lot beside the chapel steps. The Reverend was the first to say anything. He found the stallion in the narrow strip of ground between the church wall and the old stone well, his head low, front hoof churning steadily at the dust like a metronome. It wasn't panicked. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. "Shoo," the Reverend said, swatting the air with his hat. "You're going to kill yourself in this heat." But the stallion didn't move, just kept digging. The Reverend called the stablehand from down the road, a young boy named Eli who'd cleaned stalls for pennies since he was 9. Eli brought a rope and a carrot and a voice soft enough to quiet thunderstorms. He approached slow, careful. "Easy now," he said. "Ain't no trouble. Let's get you somewhere shaded." The stallion paused, just for a moment. Then he looked at Eli, with that one good eye, that eye like a storm still burning after it's passed. And in it was something that didn't belong in a creature half dead and half forgotten. Recognition. Eli froze. Something about that look rooted him to the spot. And that's when the stallion stomped hard, once, twice, and dug deeper. Something clinked. Eli heard it. So did the Reverend. And the two of them crouched down together in the dirt as the stallion stepped back, breathing slow, steam rising off his flanks like mist. They dug, with bare hands, with hearts thudding, until they uncovered the corner of something wooden, old, rotted, wrapped in tar cloth, so dry it cracked apart at their touch. Inside was a rusted tin box, and inside that was a key, a map, and a sealed letter addressed in trembling ink, to the one who remembers what others forget. Eli stared at the letter, his dirt-caked fingers trembling as he brushed away the dry flakes of tar cloth. The paper inside had yellowed with age, but the ink was clear, dark, as if it had just dried. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he turned to the Reverend, who knelt beside him in stunned silence. Neither of them said a word. The stallion stood a few feet off, not watching, not pressing, just waiting. Like his job was done, like he'd spent years standing still so he could bring this into the light. Eli's throat felt tight. His heart hadn't slowed once since he heard that metal-on-stone clink. Something about it. It had weight. Not just the box, not just the find, but what it meant. That it had been down there this whole time, hidden behind the church, behind the prayers, behind the hymns and the eulogies, and the 100 Sunday mornings no one ever questioned. The Reverend cleared his throat, voice low. "Well, son, open it." Eli did. The seal cracked gently beneath his thumb. Inside was a single sheet folded 4 times. He unfolded it slowly, carefully, until the writing stared up at him like a voice from another century. If this letter has been found, then the stallion did what I could not. He remembered. This key opens the door beneath the church, the one boarded shut in '82 after the rains took the floor. They said it wasn't safe, that it was best left sealed, but they were wrong. What lies below was never lost, only protected, hidden so it couldn't be used, so it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands again. If you are reading this, then the trust has chosen you. Use what you find, or guard it, but above all, listen to the stallion. He will guide you better than any man ever could. W. H. Banner, 1897. Banner, the Reverend whispered, leaning in. That's the old deacon, the one who vanished during the fire. Eli looked up sharply. I thought he died in the flood. No, the Reverend said slowly, shaking his head. That's just what folks say. He disappeared, right before the ledger room burned down. They never found his body. Eli's eyes dropped back to the key. It was heavy, brass, shaped like a cross on one end and jagged on the other. There was a strange curve etched along the shaft, almost like a brand. I've seen this mark before, he murmured. Where? Eli looked toward the back of the church where the warped cellar door sat under a tangle of weeds and creeping vines. He remembered being 5 years old, sitting in the pews while his mother sang, watching that corner like it was alive. There had always been something about that door. No one used it, no one touched it, but sometimes, when the light hit just right, he swore he saw a shimmer in the wood, like heat off stone, like it was watching him back. Now he knew why. He stood slowly, the map and the letter still clutched in his hand. The stallion met his gaze. Eli nodded, and the stallion turned, walked straight to the cellar door, and pawed once, twice, 3 times, then waited, just like he had when he found the box. The Reverend swallowed hard. You thinking what I'm thinking? I'm thinking, Eli said, this stallion's not just remembering where the past was. He stepped forward. He's remembering where it still is. Eli approached the cellar door with the kind of slow reverence a man might give the lid of a coffin he's not sure he wants to open. The weeds whispered around his boots, brittle and dry, snapping under his weight. The stallion watched him silently, his one good eye tracking every step, muscles tense beneath a scarred coat. He wasn't tired. He wasn't sick. He was waiting. The door looked worse up close. The wood was gray and splintered, warped from years of sun and storms. Iron hinges rusted so deep they bled orange streaks into the grain. It was nailed shut, at least a dozen long nails driven straight through thick boards like someone had meant for it to stay closed. Eli looked at the key again. The brand-like curve etched into it shimmered faintly in the afternoon light. The Reverend stood a few steps behind, hands in his pockets, eyes squinting like he didn't want to see what would happen next. You sure about this? He asked quietly. No, Eli said, but I think he is. The stallion snorted once, sharp and low. Eli reached forward and pressed the key to the wood, unsure what he expected. Maybe nothing, maybe a refusal, maybe the world to stay the same. But as soon as the metal touched the door, there was a click. Not the latch, not the lock, the wood itself. The sound echoed like a breath sucked in through a long-sealed mouth. And then the planks began to shift. Not break, not splinter, shift. Like they'd just been waiting for the right hand. The nails slid free, clattering to the ground like dry bones. The hinges groaned once and dropped. The boards curled back, not violently, but slowly, respectfully, revealing a dark, yawning square that breathed cool air up from somewhere deep, deep below. It wasn't a cellar. It was a staircase, and it led far beneath the church. Eli stepped back. The stallion didn't. He walked right up to the opening, peered down into the dark, and then, without waiting for a command, began to descend. Wait, the Reverend said, but Eli raised a hand. He knows. A moment passed. Then Eli followed. The steps were stone, ancient, uneven, and worn smooth in the middle. The air smelled of old water and dust, like a cave sealed for centuries. Somewhere far below, a single drip echoed, steady, rhythmic. Eli kept one hand on the stone wall, the other still clutching the map. He couldn't see the stallion anymore, but he could hear him. Each hoof fall careful, private, deliberate. After what felt like a full minute of descent, the steps leveled out into a narrow corridor. There was light, not from a lamp or torch. It came from the walls themselves, veins of glowing mineral running through the stone like frozen lightning, pale blue and silver. The glow was soft but steady, just enough to see the stallion standing ahead, completely still. And beyond him, carved into the far wall, was a door. Not wooden, not iron, but stone, shaped like a shield, lined with symbols Eli didn't recognize. Some looked like stars, others like runes. In the center was a circular recess, just large enough for a key. Eli stepped forward, slid the key into place, and turned. The door didn't open with a rumble. It breathed. A sudden draft of warm air rolled over them both. The stone shimmered, and then it wasn't there anymore. Just gone, revealing a chamber beyond. It wasn't large, no bigger than a chapel, but what sat in the center made Eli's breath catch. A pedestal. Upon it, a book. Thick, bound in leather so dark it looked black but shimmered red when the light hit it. Chains wrapped around its cover, fastened with 3 latches, 2 already open. The third was shaped like a hoof print. Eli turned slowly. The stallion stepped forward, walked to the pedestal, and placed his front right hoof directly into the groove. The latch snapped open, the chains fell away, and the book pulsed once, as if drawing breath. Eli reached for it, hands shaking. On the cover, words began to appear, not etched, but rising like mist. The covenant of remembrance. By those who remained when all else was lost. And below that, guarded by the ones who remember. The stallion turned his head, looked at Eli, and in that moment the truth crashed down like thunder. This wasn't about a treasure. This wasn't about a secret. This was about a warning. And the stallion hadn't led Eli here just to open it. He'd led him here to finish something. Eli stepped back from the pedestal, his heart hammering in his chest, his breath shallow like he'd sprinted miles. The glow from the walls shifted subtly, as if responding to the book's awakening. The chamber, for all its age, suddenly felt alive. The stallion stood still, his hoof still resting lightly on the pedestal base, the last latch now open. There was no pride in his face, no triumph, only certainty, only purpose. Eli stared at the book. The title burned faintly with that ghostlight glow, The Covenant of Remembrance. It wasn't just a book, it was a record, a seal, maybe a warning, maybe a promise. He looked down and realized his hands were trembling, not from fear, from understanding. He was in a room no one had walked into in over 100 years. A stallion had remembered the way, a stallion who had waited, who had known, somehow, where to dig, where to guide, where to lead. This was not coincidence. It was design. Eli reached out. The moment his fingertips touched the cover, the air in the chamber shifted. It pressed inward, not violently, but like a gathering hush, like every molecule of stone and dust and memory was leaning closer, listening. He opened the book. The pages inside were thick, pulpy, and edged with silver thread. They didn't crumble when touched, but they creaked like timber. Old, tested, strong. The ink was brown, and the handwriting varied from page to page, line to line. Dozens of hands, maybe hundreds, and every entry began the same way. I was there when they buried it. I saw what they couldn't destroy. I held the last copy when the flames reached the steeple. Page after page, story after story, written not to be seen but to be preserved, maps, names, symbols, secrets, all left behind by those who had refused to forget when the world demanded silence. One passage stopped Eli cold. We could not protect it forever, so we passed the burden to those who would follow, not kings, not generals, but the quiet ones, the listeners, the faithful, the ones who never looked away when something broken walked into the light. They will come when the world is distracted again, when history has been paved over, when faith is mistaken for foolishness. They will come with shovels and fire and hollow words, and when they do, let the stallions remember, let them dig, let them guide the chosen to where the covenant sleeps. Eli's breath caught in his throat. It was all true. This wasn't just about what had been hidden. It was about who had been guarding it. He turned to the stallion who hadn't moved. That old face, tired and wise, watched him not like an animal, but like a witness. And in that moment, Eli understood. The old stallion wasn't just a messenger. He was a keeper, a last line of defense, the first line of truth. He'd been passed down or had survived longer than any should. Maybe others had guided him to the edge of this place and then died, their duty incomplete. Maybe he'd walked alone for decades, holding this secret, waiting for someone, anyone, who would listen. And now that someone was Eli. He turned the page. On it was a drawing, simple, etched in charcoal. A gate, not a church gate, not a cemetery gate. A city gate, a one Eli had seen before, in dreams. It was a curved arch built of heavy stone, half buried in ivy and moss, the keystone marked with a symbol, the same brand that had been etched into the key's shaft. Below it, another inscription. When the first door opens, the rest will awaken. The covenant is not a place. It is a path, and you have just taken the first step. Eli closed the book slowly. Everything inside him felt different now. He wasn't just a stablehand. He was the beginning of something long delayed. And the stallion, he was the only reason Eli was here at all. He stepped toward the old horse, placed his hand against the worn cheek, where gray fur gave way to scar tissue and memory. "Thank you," he whispered. The stallion closed his eye, pressed lightly into the touch, then turned toward the tunnel. He was ready to leave, not because his duty was over, but because it had finally begun again. Eli followed. Out of the chamber, back through the stone hallway, the glowing veins fading gently behind them like a heartbeat at rest. They climbed the stairs together, and when they stepped into the sunlight, it was as if the town hadn't changed. The wind still moved through the grass. The steeple still leaned slightly to the left. But Eli was not the same. He turned once more to the stallion. The horse stared at the church, then at the hill behind it. Then, without hesitation, he began to walk. Not aimlessly, purposefully, like he knew where the next step was meant to land. Eli didn't ask questions. He just grabbed his satchel, slipped the book inside, and followed. Because when the stallion remembers, you follow, no matter what waits on the other side. They left town without a word. Eli didn't stop to pack. He didn't tell the Reverend goodbye. He didn't write a note or explain a thing to the handful of folks who might wonder why the boy who mucked their stalls was suddenly gone, trailing a half-dead stallion toward the hills like he was following the ghost of something ancient. He just walked. He walked because the stallion walked, and the stallion didn't hesitate. They cut through back roads and pastures, across dry creek beds and narrow cattle paths that twisted through the rocks like veins. The sun beat down hard that first afternoon, but neither of them slowed. The stallion's hooves struck the earth like clock hands, precise, steady, deliberate. The dust clung to them both, but Eli barely noticed. He was too busy thinking about the book in his satchel, about the key that had burned hot in his palm when it touched the door, about the way the covenant had spoken without sound, each word sliding into his chest like a truth he'd always known but never put to words. He felt awake now, sharper, like some long-dead part of him had stirred the moment the stallion dug behind the church, and he couldn't help but wonder, how long had the stallion been waiting? How long had he stood, unclaimed and unnoticed, tied to rails and posts in places where no one cared to ask why he looked toward the horizon like it was whispering to him? They made camp beneath a canopy of pines the first night, the stallion lying down only when Eli did, his body coiled like a spring, but eyes half-lidded, trusting. Eli didn't light a fire. The stars were enough. And he didn't sleep, not really. His dreams were too thick with strange symbols and carved stones, and a voice, low, soft, unmistakably human, repeating the same line over and over again. When the first door opens, the rest will awaken. He woke before dawn and found the stallion already standing, waiting. They moved east. By the third day, Eli began to recognize the terrain, not from memory, but from the map. He'd unrolled it the night before, flattening it on a stone beneath the moonlight, his fingers tracing the faded ink like they were brushing over skin. The map wasn't complete. There were gaps, places with only symbols, a spiral where a name should be. A jagged line slashed across a mountain range that had no name. But near the center, near the mark shaped like the Keys brand, was a name written in slanted script. White Hollow. He'd never heard of it. But he knew the stallion was headed there. His gait changed when they took the left fork on an abandoned logging trail. His ears pricked forward, his steps grew quicker. Eli followed without question. 2 days later, they reached it. It wasn't a town, not anymore, just the bones of one, collapsed roofs, chimney stacks without houses, a church bell lying on its side, half sunk into the dirt. The signpost at the trailhead was so weather-worn Eli almost missed it, but when he wiped away the moss with his sleeve, the words White Hollow etched faintly across the wood confirmed it. The stallion didn't slow. He moved straight to the center of the ruins, to what had once been the town square. A stone well sat in the middle, long dried up, rim cracked, and choked with weeds. But the stallion didn't stop there. He passed it, turned, and began to dig again, this time behind a burned-out post office, its walls nothing but ash-stained bones. The stallion stomped once, then twice, then scraped at the dirt with a familiar rhythm. Eli dropped to his knees and began to help. Within minutes, his fingers struck something hard. He brushed the soil away. Another box, this one smaller than the first, wrapped in faded red cloth, edges curled from age, no lock, no latch. He opened it. Inside was a single item, a compass, old, brass, the needle still quivering despite having been buried for decades. But it didn't point north. It spun once, twice, then locked into place, pointing northeast. Eli turned. There was nothing but forest that way, thick and dark and uncut, but the stallion was already moving. Eli pocketed the compass and followed. Because that was the rule now. When the stallion remembers, you follow. Always. They moved into the trees like ghosts. The forest swallowed them whole within minutes. Thick trunks, roots like twisted ropes, branches draped in moss that hung like breath held too long. The light dimmed. The air grew still. It smelled of cedar and earth, and something older beneath it all, something that hadn't been disturbed in generations. The stallion moved like he'd walked this path before, not just once, but many times. His hooves avoided roots. His ears twitched before branches fell, and his pace never faltered. Eli followed in silence, the compass warm in his palm. It still pointed northeast. They traveled for hours, the trees pressing closer as they climbed a gradual incline. Eventually, they came to a clearing, perfectly round, too symmetrical to be natural. The grass was short here, yellowed, and near the center stood a ring of stones no taller than a man's knee. There were 12 of them, each carved with a mark Eli didn't recognize, except one. The Keys brand. He stepped closer. The compass in his hand began to vibrate, just slightly, a soft buzz, like it was sensing something beneath his feet. The stallion came to stand beside him. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, walked directly into the stone ring. He stood in its center, stared downward, and began to dig again. Eli's breath caught. There wasn't dirt this time, only grass, soft and thin, peeling back easily beneath the stallion's hooves to reveal a perfectly circular piece of metal set into the ground. It looked like a drain cover, but larger, etched with a series of concentric rings, and a slit in the center just wide enough for a key. Eli dropped to his knees, pulled the key from around his neck, slid it in. It didn't resist. It turned like it had been waiting for this moment all its life. The metal beneath them shuddered. The ground trembled, not violently, but with the slow certainty of something waking up from a long sleep. Grass around the ring began to lift. The stones hummed faintly, one by one, until the air within the circle shimmered. And then the door opened. It didn't swing or drop. It folded, a perfect spiral of brass unwinding itself downward step by step, until a spiral staircase opened into the earth. The stallion waited for Eli to move. Eli took one step forward, then another. He descended into the dark. The walls here were smooth, carved, not blasted. Veins of quartz and what looked like silver ran through the stone, pulsing with a faint light. The air smelled cold, clean, like rain on stone. And when he reached the bottom, Eli found himself in another chamber, bigger than the last, and filled with books, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, each sealed in a casing of crystal and copper stacked in a circle around a single altar. On that altar lay a mask. It was metal, sharp, almost bird-like, with curved wings on either side and a single slit where the eyes would be. Beneath it sat another piece of parchment. Eli lifted it carefully. This is the archive of the remembered. The stallions were our first guardians. They saw without judgment. They carried without question. They remembered without forgetting. We chose them because they knew the land when men did not. They were not corrupted by coin or power. They were constant, and they chose you. If you have followed the path, then you are not the first, but you may be the last. Eli felt the stallion behind him, warm breath on the back of his neck. He turned, and the old horse, gray, battered, blind in one eye, stepped forward and lowered his head, not in exhaustion, not in fear, but in ceremony. Eli realized then this wasn't just a vault, it was a passing. The stallion was not only leading him to the archive, he was transferring guardianship. This was Eli's now, not just to protect, but to remember, to carry it forward. He stepped up to the altar, placed one hand on the mask. It was cold, heavy, laced with something older than iron. The moment he touched it, he heard them. Voices, hundreds of them, stories, names, places, dates, memories, all being handed to him, not forced, but offered. He accepted them. He became the archive. And the stallion finally exhaled and lay down beside the altar, his body easing into the stone with a softness that told Eli his duty was done. And now Eli's had begun. The silence in that chamber was unlike any Eli had ever known. It wasn't hollow or empty. It was full of breath not taken, full of names not spoken in decades, full of truth waiting, like a note held in the throat of a song the world forgot how to sing. The stallion didn't stir. His breathing was shallow, steady, his sides rising and falling with the kind of peace that only comes at the end of a burden he had carried alone in silence for years, maybe longer. Eli knelt beside him, resting a hand on the thick, scarred neck. "I'll remember," he whispered. The words felt like a vow, because it was one. The archive around him pulsed faintly as though it had heard. The mask on the altar no longer shimmered. It glowed with a soft inner light, a heartbeat not unlike the one Eli now felt in his chest. the kind that told him he had been chosen, not by accident, not by pity, but because he had listened. He turned slowly, taking in the circle of sealed books, each locked in copper and crystal, hovering slightly above their stone rests. They weren't sorted by year, or name, or place. They were sorted by memory. And not all the memories belonged to people. Some bore hoof marks along their bindings. Others had the faint impression of rope. Some pulsed when he neared them, like they were waking up for the first time in 100 years. He approached the nearest one. It vibrated faintly under his touch. A small slot appeared on its surface, shaped exactly like the compass he'd carried in his satchel, the one the stallion had helped him find. Eli slid it in. The casing unlocked with a hiss and released the book inside. Its cover bore a single name, Samuel Treadlow, the boy who knew the horses were speaking. Eli opened the book. The pages didn't hold chapters. They held accounts. Stories that read like memories, first person. They detailed a boy in the 1860s who had stood at the edge of a battlefield, watching a dying cavalry mount paw at the ground until it uncovered a pouch of encrypted Confederate orders buried beneath a patch of bluebells. The boy had taken them, delivered them to a Union outpost, and the battle had turned. No one had believed him, except the horse. And now the story lived here. Eli closed the book carefully, resealed it in its case, turned to the next. This one bore no name, just a hoof print, burned into leather. He reached for it, then stopped. Because behind him the stallion stirred. His eye opened, his ears flicked, and he lifted his head, not to rise, to face Eli. They locked eyes, and Eli felt it. The last memory, not in words, but in feeling. The old stallion was not just a keeper, he was a witness, and Eli understood now. This archive didn't exist because someone had planned to protect knowledge. It existed because someone, had never stopped remembering. Not a man, not a priest, not a soldier, a horse, an old broken forgotten horse, who remembered where it began, who waited until the right soul knelt beside him, and who had now, at last, passed the fire on. Eli sat beside him and placed the mask on his lap, not over his face. Not yet. He wasn't ready to wear the story, but he was ready to hold it. And the stallion lowered his head to the stone and let his eyes close, not to die, to rest. He had done what no one else could. He had waited, and the story would go on, because Eli was listening now, and the trail would not be lost again. Not ever. Eli stayed in the archive for 3 days. He didn't eat much, didn't sleep long. The chamber itself seemed to take care of him, air that never grew stale, light that never went out. He spent his time moving from one crystal case to the next, unlocking those that responded to his compass, reading each memory like scripture. He learned of farmers who followed stallions into flooded fields and found bridges washed out hours before their wagons would have crossed. He read of a girl who claimed her blind pony dragged her away from a burning barn while her family perished, only to later discover a map hidden in that same barn's ash, leading to a town once thought lost to war. Page after page, life after life, memory after memory. Some stories were beautiful, some were harrowing, some were just quiet. But they all had one thing in common. They had been remembered by a horse, not just any horse. The guardians, the witnesses, the reminders. It was clear now. These stallions weren't ordinary creatures. They weren't just smart. They were part of the trust itself, living vessels of memory, walking timelines. They did not forget. They waited. And when the time came, they dug. When they dug, they were pointing not just to the past, but to a truth buried too deep for human eyes alone. On the morning of the 4th day, Eli woke to find the stallion gone. He panicked for a moment, ran his hands over the warm stone where the horse had rested. It was still slightly damp from breath, still marked by a few loose gray hairs. He sprinted up the spiral passage and emerged into the daylight, half-blinded and barefoot. But the stallion was there, standing just beyond the ring of stones, facing the forest again, waiting. Eli stared. "Where are we going now?" he asked softly. The stallion turned his head, and something stirred in Eli's chest. Not a voice, not a thought, a knowing. There was another one, another memory, another archive, another keeper. This wasn't the only one. White Hollow had been a beginning, not a destination. The stallion began to walk. Eli followed. The compass in his satchel pulsed warm again. The needle didn't spin. It held steady, pointing due south now. The map he'd unrolled dozens of times in camp was beginning to make more sense. Its gaps were not mistakes. They were promises, places that hadn't yet been filled because the memories there were still waiting to be uncovered. And he would be the one to find them. He understood that now. He wasn't just a reader. He was a recorder, a connector, a keeper. The archive wasn't a place, it was a path, a living trail of memory. And the stallions, they were its hooves. As they walked, Eli knew that people would never believe the truth if he tried to explain it. They'd see an old horse and a boy with a strange journal and think it was all imagination. But some wouldn't. Some would see it, the way Eli had, the way the stallion had known he would. And those people, the listeners, the wanderers, the forgotten and the curious, they'd find him. And when they did, he'd be ready, because the archive would grow again, one hoofprint, one name, one memory at a time. And the world would remember what it was never supposed to forget, because one stallion had. And someone finally had listened. They traveled for weeks after that. No roads, no trails, just the compass, the stallion, and the growing sense that something unseen was guiding each step. Eli no longer needed a destination. He trusted the direction. The map inside his satchel had begun to unfold on its own, the ink deepening in places as if memories long dormant were beginning to rise to the surface again. He watched as the stallion moved through unfamiliar landscapes with impossible familiarity, taking turns through piney switchbacks that hadn't been walked in decades, pausing beside landmarks no map maker had ever recorded, stopping to stare at boulders, rivers, and empty tree lines like he could see the story still etched in the ground. And Eli could feel it too. The air would shift. The silence would deepen. His heartbeat would slow, and he'd know there's something here. One night they came upon a field where the grass grew in uneven patches, swaying in spirals around an old iron fence half swallowed by time. The moon was high and bright, and as Eli approached the fence he saw what remained of a gravestone, tilted, broken, but still marked. C. M. Radley, 1843-1879. He spoke with horses, and they answered. Eli stared at it, mouth dry. He didn't dig. He knelt, and when he placed his hand on the soil just inside the fence line, he felt it again. That thrum, low and deep, not sound, but memory. He looked to the stallion, and the stallion pawed once, soft and slow, not to break the ground, to bless it, to acknowledge it. Eli took out his journal. He wrote everything, every word on the stone, every turn of the wind, every movement of the stallion's head. He didn't know it yet, but that journal would become the second archive. Not a vault of glass and copper like White Hollow, but a living, breathing ledger, a portable archive, a trail edition. He kept it in his coat close to his heart. Over time, he began to draw symbols alongside the entries, hoofprints, old brands, markings from stone pillars, rusted gates, broken markers carved with initials long erased from history. The compass guided his direction, the stallion guided his steps, and the archive, now growing in both book and heart, guided his purpose. Eventually, people started to notice. A rancher let him sleep in a barn after his horse wouldn't stop following Eli to the gate. A child in a village whispered that their pony kept returning to the same grove where a stone had once stood. A woman at a trading post looked at the stallion with wide eyes and said, My grandfather had dreams about that horse. Eli didn't explain. He didn't have to. He just wrote it all down. Because the archive was no longer hidden, it was moving. It was awakening. And the stallion? He was growing older, slower. But his steps never lost purpose. Until one evening, just as the sun kissed the horizon in a canyon that smelled of sage and dust, the stallion stopped walking. He stood at the edge of a shallow ravine where stone columns jutted from the earth like ribs. Eli dismounted. He knew. This was the place. Not the end of the trail, but the place where the trail would be passed again. The stallion walked to the largest column, scraped his hoof once against its base, then lay down. Eli didn't cry, not at first. He simply knelt, sat beside him, held his face in his hands. "You did it," he whispered. "You remembered." The stallion closed his eye, exhaled, and rested. Eli stayed until the stars filled the sky. Then gently, he took the compass and set it on the stallion's chest. He placed the journal beside him, and then he carved a single line into the stone with his knife. He led me to what was forgotten, and now I remember for him. In the morning, he walked out of the canyon alone, but not empty, because the stallion's memory, the true memory, was not buried. It was with him now, in every step, in every entry, in every soul who would one day ask him, "Why do you walk alone?" And he would answer, "I don't." Because when the stallion remembers, we never walk alone again. The seasons changed around him. Snow fell on mountains he passed through. Spring rose from the ground in bursts of wildflowers along ridges where the wind sang louder than any church choir. Summer brought storms that soaked him through and left him laughing under the trees, soaked and smiling because even now, especially now, he felt more alive than he ever had before. The world had opened to him, not in fanfare, but in quiet. It unfolded through fence posts with carvings no one noticed, in broken wagon wheels still half buried at the bend in a forgotten road. In the way, some animals turned their heads when he walked by, as if they knew, as if they remembered too. Eli no longer asked for directions. He let the trail call to him. Sometimes it was a feeling, other times a child's story. Once it was a painting hung crooked on the wall of a general store in a mining town, painted decades ago by a woman who claimed she saw a horse, with one blind eye, dig up a silver coin from a cemetery floor. Eli stood in front of it for almost an hour. He didn't have to see the signature to know the truth. That story was real. The stallion had been there too. Another piece of the map. He wrote it down. He added it to the archive. He added everything to the archive now. His thoughts, his dreams, even the way his bones ached on certain hills, and how sometimes, in the deepest woods, he'd hear hoofbeats behind him, though nothing was there. He wasn't afraid. He welcomed it, because he wasn't alone. And as time passed, others began to walk with him. First, a girl named May, who claimed her father had once chased off a horse that wouldn't leave their porch. A month later, they found a small lead box in the corner of the cellar, hidden beneath loose bricks. Inside, a locket, a coin, and a letter, marked with the brand Eli knew too well. Then came Tom, a quiet man who'd been dreaming of bells he couldn't place until he stumbled across Eli in a valley full of rusted iron ore and wild chamomile. They sat by the fire that night, and Eli said nothing, just handed him the journal. Tom read until dawn, and never left. More came, not many, but enough. They weren't a group. They weren't followers. They didn't wear uniforms or give speeches. They were listeners. And when Eli handed them a compass or a page or simply nodded toward a town that hadn't seen strangers in decades, they followed. They found boxes, letters, names, truths too big for books and too fragile for history's hands. And everywhere they walked, it was the same. Someone remembered. Someone buried it. And now someone was ready to carry it forward. They called themselves nothing. But when pressed, Eli finally gave them the name the stallion had earned 100 times over. The Remembered. They wore it quietly, spoke it rarely, but carried it in every breath. Years passed. Eli grew older. His face hardened. His eyes softened. His journal thickened, the leather stretching with new entries, new hands, new voices. He no longer knew how many archives had been found. He no longer needed to. He only knew this: the story was safe. And on the day he could walk no further, he sat at the edge of a canyon, overlooking a valley the maps had stopped marking long ago. In his lap, a fresh journal, blank. He opened it, wrote the first words. "When I was a boy, I followed a horse no one wanted," and he remembered everything. Then he closed it, left it on the stone where the sun would find it, and whispered to the wind, "Now it's your turn." Behind him, in the shade of a cedar tree, a young horse stood, gray-coated, one eye pale, waiting, not alone, not forgotten, ready. Because when the stallion remembers, so does the world. And when the world remembers, the trail goes on, forever. Some say the trail ends where the last hoofprint fades, but they're wrong. Because what Eli left behind wasn't just a journal or a tale or a myth scrawled into the margins of forgotten history. It was a doorway. A breath passed from soul to soul, quiet and eternal. The boy who found that final journal was 17. His name was Caleb. His hands were blistered from fence work. His shirt was 3 sizes too big, handed down from men who never came back from the war. And he wasn't looking for purpose. He was looking for something that hurt less than being forgotten. He found the journal by accident, or so he thought. It was resting on a smooth stone at the top of the ridge, sun-warmed, untouched by rain, as if it had been placed there only minutes ago. In part the writing was strange, old-fashioned, looping like river script, but the words struck like thunder. "When I was a boy, I followed a horse no one wanted." Caleb read it twice, then a third time. His heart beat harder with every page. By the time the sun slipped behind the edge of the valley, he had finished it. He didn't cry, he didn't speak. He simply stood and turned toward the cedar tree. The horse was still there, gray-coated, silent. One eye clouded, the other watching, waiting. Caleb stepped forward. The horse didn't move. He reached out, placed a hand on its neck, and in that heartbeat of silence, everything passed. Not through speech, not through vision, through memory, through the trust. Caleb didn't have a map, he didn't need one. The stallion moved, and he followed. Because that's how the archive lives on, not through temples or titles, through footsteps, through those who listen, through those who carry the journal, the truth, the burden, the flame. Every town they passed through whispered something familiar. The stallion would stop, dig, turn toward a door that no longer opened, pause before a grave no one visited, and each time Caleb would kneel, mark the moment, add it to his pages, because that was his purpose now, not just to remember, to record, to honor. And when the time came, years later, when his own hands had calluses carved by time and ink, he too left a journal, not in the same place as Eli's, in a hollow tree carved with the old brand. Inside the journal, symbols, maps, stories, a final sentence written just before dawn. He remembers. I remember. Now it's yours. Another horse would find the next one. Another forgotten soul, another flicker of fire waiting to be reignited, because the stallions are still walking, because the past is still alive, because you are reading this now, and you didn't find this story by chance. You found it because the trust is still moving, because something inside you paused at the sound of hooves in the distance. Something made you listen, made you feel that this story was more than fiction. And maybe, just maybe, you've felt that nudge before. Maybe you've stood near an old barn and thought the wind sounded like breathing. Maybe you've passed a fence post with a strange mark and turned back hours later because it pulled at you. Maybe you've dreamed of a horse, old and gray, standing still and waiting, not for rescue, but for recognition. If so, you already know what comes next. You pick up the journal, you take the first step, and you follow, because the stallion still remembers. And now, so do you. And as you take that step, hesitant, hopeful, heart-pounding, you don't feel like a stranger to this trail. You feel like someone coming home, because everything around you starts to resonate. The bend in the path that feels familiar, though you've never walked it. The weight of the satchel slung over your shoulder, heavier than it should be. The way your hand finds the journal's worn spine like it belongs there. The way the wind shifts just slightly when you whisper aloud, "I'm ready." The stallion doesn't look back. He doesn't need to, because he knows what you haven't yet said. You were chosen, because you listened, because you believed. So you walk, not because you know what you'll find, but because you know what must be found. The first night you make camp beneath the open sky, you dream of things you haven't lived. You see a boy digging beside a church. You see firelight flickering over copper-bound books. You see a woman kneeling beside a half-starved colt, whispering a name she hasn't spoken in years. You see Eli, you see Caleb, you see yourself, and when you wake, the stallion is already up. Waiting? Because there's a box ahead, hidden in a well that no one drinks from anymore. A carving beneath a pew that someone once traced every Sunday. A letter buried beneath a fieldstone that has shifted exactly 1 inch in the past century, now ready to be lifted. You'll find them. You were meant to. Because when the trust chose you, it didn't pick a warrior or a scholar. It picked a rememberer, someone quiet, someone gentle, someone strong enough to carry not just weight, but meaning. And you will carry it. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. And one day, years from now, when the stallion you follow has walked his final mile, you'll feel it. That moment when the torch passes again, you'll place a journal in a hollow, or carve a name into the bark of a tree, or slip a compass into the pack of a traveler who hasn't yet asked for it. And then you'll rest, knowing the trail is safe, knowing the story goes on, knowing that someone, somewhere, will follow. And when they do, when they place their hand on the back of the next stallion and whisper, "I don't know why, but I trust you," the memory will stir, the map will unfold, and the world will remember, because that's the promise of the archive. Not riches, not glory, not fame, but this: the trail never ends. The stallion remembers, and the story will always, always find the next one. And still the trail stretches onward, not in a line, but in a web, woven across hills and hollows, through valleys soaked in shadow and mountain passes kissed by dawn. It touches places where no map has reached. It hums in fence rails. It sleeps in cellar dust. It waits beneath floorboards, behind bricks, inside journals whose pages are as soft as breath. And now you are part of it. You, the listener, the keeper, the next in line. There will be days ahead when you doubt this calling. When you sit beneath a strange sky in a strange town and ask yourself, what if it was all just a story? But then you'll hear it, a hoof step slow and steady, a scrape at the earth just beyond the light, a feeling in your chest, that same pull you've felt since the beginning, and you'll know. The story is real, the memory is alive, and the stallion, he remembers. He always will, even when no one else believes, even when the world moves too fast, too loud, too bright. He'll be there, head bowed, hoof ready, eyes watching the horizon, waiting for you to notice what others step over, waiting for you to kneel, to brush aside the years, and to uncover what must not be forgotten, because you now are a guardian, a bearer of fire, a soul who sees treasure in silence. So go, not with haste, not with fear, go with reverence, with wonder, with purpose. And when someone stops you along the way, some stranger with a puzzled look, some wanderer who feels that same tug in their chest, and they ask, "Where are you headed?" Smile, and say the only thing that ever needs to be said, "I'm following the stallion." Then hand them a page, or a name, or simply a look that says, "Listen closely. Your turn is coming, because it is. It always is. The stallion remembers, the trail endures, and the archive is growing. And with every step you take, it grows still. Not louder, not brighter, but deeper. The archive does not call for attention. It calls for devotion, for hearts that bow without being asked, for hands that reach not to own but to honor, for souls like yours. And you'll come to know with time that there is no end to what you carry now, because this isn't just a legacy, it's a living trust. Each hoofprint a word, each turn in the trail a sentence, each soul who walks it a chapter. You are writing the story even now, as your boots scuff gravel, as your breath fogs against dawn light, as the stallion walks ahead of you, never looking back, because he knows you are there. Because he remembers. You'll find more. You'll find them in the quiet corners, in the smile of a widow who sees the horse beside you and gasps, "That can't be?" In the dreams of a child who draws a symbol you've only ever seen carved into ancient stone. In the pages of a forgotten book, where a pressed flower hides a cipher that opens a lock no one even knows exists. And when you do, you won't question it. You'll record it. You'll keep the flame lit. Because this is the work. This is the weight. This is the gift. The stallion gave it to you without asking for anything in return. No reward, no thanks, no promise, just trust. And now you walk in that trust. It will carry you through sorrow, through distance, through silence. It will place you at the exact patch of earth where something lost has waited long enough to be found. And when your knees touch the soil, and your fingers brush old stone, and your chest fills with the knowledge that you were meant to be here, you'll hear it again. That sacred whisper between worlds, between hooves, between heartbeats. We remember. And that will be enough, always, forever. And in that quiet, when the world around you stills, when the wind holds its breath, when the stallion beside you lowers his head not in exhaustion, but in reverence, you'll understand the full truth. You were never following a trail. You are the trail. Everything you do from this point forward, every name you preserve, every story you record, every box you bury or uncover, adds to the living thread of the archive. You become its voice, its hands, its guardian, not because you asked for it, but because you answered when it called, and it will call again, to others, to the quiet, to the overlooked, to the broken and the brilliant and the brave. You will see it in them. You will recognize the look, the same one you carried when the stallion first chose you. That mixture of disbelief and awe, of why me, and I know I must, and you'll pass it on. Maybe with a journal, maybe with a key, maybe with nothing more than a whisper at a crossroads. There's something waiting for you. Follow it. And just like that, the archive will grow again. Another voice, another memory, another chapter. And when your final steps come, when your body grows too tired to walk, but your heart still burns, you'll find your place beneath an open sky, maybe beside a cedar tree, maybe under a cairn built by hands that once held a compass. You'll leave your story, folded in a box, tucked under stone, and the stallion, maybe your own, maybe a new one with eyes like moonlight and scars from roads yet walked. He'll wait. He'll wait for the next, because he remembers, because he always remembers. And the trail? It will still be there, winding through the forgotten, etched into the hills, alive in hoofprints and hope. And someone else, maybe someone not yet born, will find your words, read your name, close their eyes, and whisper, "Thank you for remembering." Then they'll rise, take the rope, and walk, because the stallion remembers, because the archive endures, because forever is not a promise, it's a path. And you are walking it still. And as your footsteps merge with those of all who came before, you begin to feel it, not just in your bones, but in the very shape of your shadow, in the weight of your breath, in the silence between heartbeats. You are not alone. You've never been. Every page you wrote, someone once began. Every name you preserved, someone once whispered. Every compass you carried, someone once handed forward with trembling fingers, praying you'd understand. And you did, because when the stallion turned his head toward you just once, you knew. You knew this was not about proving anything, not about earning anything, not about glory or legacy or leaving behind a mark the world could see. It was about making sure the right things were never buried again, that what was true would not be lost, that what was sacred would not be silenced. And when the day comes, and it will, when the wind sharpens just before dusk and the horizon ripples like it's remembering something, you'll feel it. Another presence on the trail. Another soul has heard the call. They'll come young or old, broken or bold. They'll be holding a satchel or a name, or maybe just a question they've carried their whole life. And you'll know them, not by what they say, but by how they pause, by how they listen, by how they look at the stallion and don't ask, "What is this?" but instead say, "Where do we begin?" And you'll hand them the next journal, or the key, or a single page, folded twice, that ends with one quiet, perfect line. Now it's your turn. Then you'll smile, not because your part is over, but because you'll be walking beside them too. Even long after you're gone, even after your name becomes a soft etching on the inside cover of a story someone else is still telling. Your trail remains, because the archive never ends, and neither does the memory, not as long as someone listens, not as long as someone kneels, not as long as the stallion remembers. And he always will. So go on, write your chapter, walk your mile, uncover what waits, and when the time comes to place your story down, do it with peace, because the trust is safe, the trail is strong, and the story walks on, forever. And somewhere, as those final words echo softly into the wind, another hoof falls. Not far from where you once walked, not far from where your story now rests, a new voice calls out, not in words, but in wonder. A breath catches, a heart stirs, a hand brushes against old stone and finds something waiting beneath. A box, a compass, a name. They won't know what it means at first, but they'll feel it. They'll feel the same tug that once pulled you forward, the same weight in their chest, the same whisper on the wind that says, "This matters." And then they'll turn, and the stallion will be there. Old or young, gray or gold, blind or bright-eyed, it doesn't matter. He will be there, because the stallion is never gone. He is memory, walking. He is the trust, breathing. He is the first hoof on the trail and the last heartbeat before the story begins again, and it will begin again. It always does, for every soul brave enough to believe in silence, for every hand that writes by firelight, for every person who sees an old horse digging behind a church and doesn't walk away. Because they know, because you taught them, because somewhere in the archive, in a binding worn smooth by time, your page still glows faintly with the warmth of having been read. And when they find it, when they speak your name aloud, not knowing why it fills the air like a prayer, the stallion will lift his head, the wind will rise, and the trail will open once more. And as it opens, as the dust lifts and the first step is taken, something ancient moves beneath the surface of the world, slow, steady, inevitable. Not fate, not magic. Remembrance. The archive, now vast and untraceable by any map, pulses like a second heartbeat beneath the skin of the land, carried by hooves, protected by silence, kept alive not in stone vaults or royal halls, but in people, quiet people, people like you. And now, like it did for Eliza and Eli and Caleb and the ones before them, the trail belongs to someone new. Someone who didn't ask to carry it, but stepped forward anyway. Someone who didn't have the answers, but listened. Someone who didn't see a broken stallion and turn away. They watched. They waited. And when he began to dig, they followed, because the story doesn't shout. It leans in. And if you're close enough, if you care enough, you'll feel it. That moment of understanding, when past and present fold together, when you know, deep in your bones, I've been chosen too. And so it goes on. The trail doesn't end at the mountain or the grave or the final page of a journal left in the hollow of a tree. It transforms. A fire passed, a legacy unfolded, and a box buried long ago, finally finding the right hands to open it. And as the newest trailbearer takes the compass, lifts the lid, reads the words left for them in your own handwriting, the archive breathes you back into the world. Your memory joins the circle. You walk beside them now, even if they never know your name, even if they never see your face. They'll know your steps, because they'll follow them. And one day, long from now, they too will pause beside a stone or a broken fence post or an old tired stallion whose eyes hold the weight of generations. And they'll understand what you did, that none of this was ever about the box or the key or even the trail. It was always about the remembering and the choice to keep remembering, even when no one else does. That is the trust. That is the gift. That is the story. And now, like every soul brave enough to follow before you, you are part of it, forever. So let the final steps of your chapter be written not in sorrow, but in light. The kind that lingers after a lantern is blown out. The kind that stays warm in ashes. The kind that finds its way through cracks in barn wood, through seams in an old saddle, through hoof prints half swallowed by time. Because this, what you've carried, what you've walked, what you've kept alive, it doesn't end. It deepens. It spreads. And now it grows beyond even you. The next trail bearer may be walking now. They may already feel the pull. Maybe they've found a half-buried stone with a strange mark on it. Maybe they've heard hooves outside their window in the night and woken with a name they don't recognize on their lips. They don't know yet, but they will, because your trail leads to them, because your journal will wait for them, because your memory has made space for them. And when they come to the moment, their moment, when they kneel beside the box, hands shaking, air holding still, and read your final words, they'll know, they'll feel you, and maybe, just maybe, they'll whisper as they close the lid, place the journal in their pack, and rise to meet the waiting stallion. I'll carry it now. And somewhere, maybe in the wind, maybe in the earth, maybe in the place between heartbeats where all things sacred reside, you'll answer, I'm with you. Because that's how the trust works, not in echoes, in presence. It doesn't look back, it walks beside. And as the next hooves step forward, as the trail weaves on through years and names and silent awakenings, you will always be part of the rhythm, a keeper, a guide, a soul the stallion trusted. And that is the kind of forever no time can take away. The story lives, the memory endures. And you, trail bearer, guardian, rememberer, you walk with it still, step by step, name by name, fire by fire, until the next one follows, and they will, they always do. Because the story does not call to many, only to those with hearts tuned to silence, eyes trained to stillness, souls open enough to believe that a forgotten horse pawing at the earth behind a church might just be holding the last thread of something sacred. The world won't notice when the next one begins. There will be no sign, no trumpet, no welcome. Just a moment, a breath, a stirring. Maybe a box, maybe a stone, maybe just a memory that doesn't belong to them, but fits anyway. And they'll follow it. They'll read the journal you left behind, trace the curl of your handwriting, feel the weight of your words settle into their bones like something they've always carried. And when they reach the final page, the one where your trail ends, where your fire rests, where your last thought waits like a lantern left burning in the window, they'll see the line you wrote, not for yourself, but for them. I remembered, so you wouldn't have to begin in the dark. That is what the trust is, a bridge, a hand held out across time, a single horse who remembers, and the one soul willing to walk beside him when no one else can see the path. That's what you were. That's what you are. And now your name is folded into the archive, not with ceremony, with belonging. There is a place now, marked only in memory, where your footsteps echo, where a stallion once waited for you, and one will wait again. Because when you are part of the trust, you are never truly gone. You are the breeze that nudges a compass needle. You are the hand that steadies when fear creeps in. You are the whisper that says, "This is the place. Start digging." And when the next one rises, they will not walk alone. They'll feel you in every hoofbeat, in every fold of the map, in every page they write. And the archive will grow again, and the fire will stay lit, and the trail will stretch just a little farther than it ever has before. Because of you, because the stallion remembered, and so did you. And in that remembering, you became more than a keeper. You became part of the source. A spark returned to the fire, a thread woven into the center of the trail, a presence that will never fade, no matter how far the archive travels, no matter how many generations pass between the steps. Because what you carried wasn't just knowledge. It wasn't just a journal or a compass or a page from someone else's past. It was faith, and not blind faith, not hope without reason. It was the kind of faith only found in those who dig because a horse told them to, in those who follow a path with no signs, no map, no promise, and yet walk anyway, because something ancient hums beneath their feet, because they believe what the stallion remembers. That's what the trust needs, not armies, not leaders, not heroes, believers, quiet ones, steady ones, ones like you. And now that the trail lives in you, it will find others through you, in your words, in your silence, in the weight of your story placed carefully in a box for someone else to find, wrapped not in cloth or wax, but in meaning. They'll lift it with shaking hands. They'll read the name on the first page, yours, and even if they never speak it aloud, they will know you, because they'll feel the same pull. They'll hear the same sound, the rhythm of hooves echoing through time. And they'll understand it as you did. This is not the end. This is the passing. And the trust, the stallion, the archive, the truth. It walks on, and so do you, and even now, especially now, forever. Somewhere just beyond the curve of the hill, another fire is being lit, not by flint or match, but by memory. It begins with a whisper, a hoof pressing gently into soft soil, a box buried decades ago, shifting beneath the weight of time, ready to rise, and a hand, new, unsure but guided, reaching for it. Because the trail never sleeps, the archive never closes, the trust never fades. It waits, it watches, it remembers, and now, because of you, it burns brighter than ever. Your story has folded into the rhythm. Your steps have become scripture. Your voice has been etched into silence, the kind that speaks only to those who listen hard enough. You gave the stallion your trust, and in return he gave you forever. So even if your body finds rest, even if the trail no longer feels the weight of your boots, even if your journal is the only thing left behind beneath a stone marked by time, the work goes on. The story continues. The next one walks now, and in the hush of their first night under the open sky, as the fire crackles low and the compass needle quivers toward some forgotten gate, they'll open your words, run their fingers across your name, and say softly, "I know you." Then they'll close the book, rise, and follow the stallion into the dark, just like you did. Because this is how the trail endures, not in monuments, but in footsteps, in choices, in trust, and most of all, in remembrance. And you are remembered now by the wind, by the archive, by the hooves still striking the path ahead. You are part of the story, forever. And still the trail winds on, It crosses rivers that no bridge dares touch. It climbs ridges where no signpost has ever stood. It passes beneath trees whose roots remember the names of every soul that ever stopped to rest in their shade. And somewhere along that trail now walks a child, maybe no older than you were when you first heard the call. They've found a box, or a name, or perhaps just a feeling that something is waiting just ahead. They won't know why they rise before the sun and walk without asking where they're going. They won't know why their hand lingers on certain stones or why a trail of hoofprints in the dust makes their heart ache in a way they can't explain. But you'll know, because you walked this way, too. You made the hard choices. You followed the quiet voice when the world was screaming for noise. You gave your steps to a cause older than nations, quieter than prayer, stronger than time. And now, because of you, the trail is easier to find. The next one will come to a crossroads where the dust hasn't been disturbed in years, and they'll see your footprints. They'll find your initials carved into the inside of a rusted compass lid. Your folded letter inside a saddlebag, worn soft with age. Your story tucked into a crack between stones, waiting for fingers that would know where to reach. And when they find it, when they feel the stir of recognition in their bones, they'll sit down just for a moment and say aloud, "Someone came this way, someone who knew, someone like me." And then they'll rise and walk and carry it further, because the trail was never meant to end with you. It was meant to begin again through you. That's what makes this eternal, not the flame, not the pages, not even the horse, but the choice, to believe, to follow, to remember. And because you did, someone else now can. So rest, keeper. Your chapter is written, your journal is safe, and the stallion, he walks still, through time, through memory, through story, carrying your name with him wherever the trail leads next, forever. And in that forever, you are not lost. You are woven into every hoofbeat echoing through canyons that no voice reaches, woven into the hush that settles just before someone uncovers something buried too deep for maps, woven into the moment when the next one, mud-streaked, breathless, and wide-eyed, looks down at an old brass key and somehow knows exactly where it goes. Because you walked the trail, because you listened when the stallion dug, because you followed when no one else believed, because you remembered when the world was built to forget. The archive lives on because of you. It grows because of your quiet courage, your pages, your patience. And now, it pulses in the distance, calling to someone new. They may be out there right now, kneeling beside a riverbed where something glints beneath the surface, or standing before a church older than their grandparents, watching a gray stallion paw the earth behind the altar, or dreaming of places they've never been, hearing names they've never spoken, and waking with the weight of knowing. They are the next one, and you have already made the way ready. The box is buried, the compass is waiting, the fire has been passed, and when they find the trail, they will walk it not as strangers, but as those called. And your story, your trail, your trust will rise to meet them, because the stallion remembers, and now so will they.